So welcome to this is week 3 in our webinar series for the Trauma Symposium. We're so glad to have you with us. We appreciate everybody pressing their way. There were some technical difficulties, but you all are committed. You're here. I appreciate you for that. This afternoon, we will be talking about how COVID grief is different. We have three presenters this morning. Our fourth person is pressing her way through the technical challenges. I believe that she's going to make it. But right now, I'd like to introduce those who are here, beginning with my co-convener, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Wilson. If you could just say a few things.
Thanks so much, Dr. Stephanie. Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for this third installment of Trauma Symposium. We are thrilled about this webinar and welcome to our 3 guests. And as has been said, our third presenter is pressing her way to get connected, and we believe she'll be able to do so. So welcome, and let's do it.
So I'd like to begin with some general introductions this afternoon, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves more thoroughly. But this afternoon, we'll begin with one of our practitioners who has an excellent communal model. Part of what we're challenged with right now is trying to figure out how we can manage what's coming up in a shifting landscape where so many things are different and we have so many needs. How can we move from more of the one-on-one practices of care towards a more communal model of care? And one of our practitioners who can speak about that is the Pastor Chris Harris, pastor of Bright Star Community Church here in Chicago. He'll be our first person to lead us off this afternoon. And we also have Elder Dr. Itihari Ture, who is joining us all the way from Atlanta. She is the founder of the Sankofa Center for Excellence. And she'll also say a little bit about herself as well when we get going. Pastor Harris, if you could open us up, that would be great.
Absolutely. First of all, let me say thank you so much, Stephanie, and to the rest of you all for allowing me to join you today. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be with you. I'm the pastor of Bright Star Church Chicago, a Kojic Church of God in Christ, located in the greater Bronzeville community. And what's been exciting is to have the opportunity to connect with other faith institutions as well as those from community-based organizations. And so we're going to jump right into the work that we've been able to do. Bright Star Church has been around for now 62 years, but about 10 years ago, I created what is called Bright Star Community Outreach. And the model, as it relates to TURN, the TURN Center or the TURN model, the Urban Resilience Network, dealing with faith and community leaders, providing trauma counseling. Our footprint is in the greater Bronzeville area. That's the 3rd and the 4th Ward. And so that's what we call 67th South, 22nd North, everything between Lakeshore Drive and the Dan Ryan. And so I can talk a whole lot, but let me just give you an opportunity to see the work actually in progress. So take a look at the screen.
Our out-of-school programs focus on early childhood to middle childhood development. We strive to improve social, emotional, cognitive, and physical skills, as well as offer academic enrichment opportunities. This past year, our 8th graders participated in a student-led photo voice project, where they explored and captured the historical beauty of Bronxville. It's projects like these that truly highlight the importance of personal and cultural awareness.
We have been privileged to serve 300 youth and families throughout the greater Bronzeville community. Within our department, we offer in-school and out-of-school programming that both impacts opportunity youth and impacts opportunities for our youth. The programs include after school, summer camp, youth empowerment solutions, and the Greater Bronzeville Youth Advocacy Council. Between these programs, we've served 160 students.
Shape and Connect is entering its 3rd school year, where our case managers provide mentorship, social emotional learning, academic and truancy support, as well as behavior modification to about 125 high school students. Our team was able to decrease truancy by 50%, as well as decrease the number of D's and F's our students received.
BSCO employs over 53 community residents each CPS school year to ensure children who travel to and from school and often alone can do so safely. Along with providing employment to these community stakeholders, we provide ongoing workforce development training and holistic support as needed.
In cooperation and partnership with Operation Hope,
Bright Star Community Outreach provides free financial programs to help individuals take control of their money. In less than 9 months, BSCO has conducted 13 financial literacy workshops. 184 clients have received financial literacy education, coaching, or a combination of both through programming. 91 individuals have enrolled in one-on-one financial coaching. Clients have seen, on average, a 69-point increase in their credit score, debt reduction of $1,000, and an increase in savings by $100 within the first 4 months of participating in our financial literacy program. This past year has been filled with impact and outcomes. Our summer youth employment program touched the lives of 250 youth. Throughout the summer, youth ages 14 and 15 explored the history of Bronzeville and the 1919 riots through photographic documentation and oral interviews of senior citizens who are our residents. 81% of our youth will be engaged either academically or in the workforce. The 19% that are disconnected have been connected with a case manager who is committed to ensuring meaningful engagement for them throughout the year. We will also take 40 African American and Jewish youth through our Better Together initiative to Washington, D.C. to explore our individual and shared cultural histories. We'll also provide year-long programming that will support building relationships between the youth and their families.
On track to provide over 6,600 Greater Bronzeville residents ages 16 to 55 with jobs that contribute to household sustainability by the year 2027, the Greater Bronzeville Neighborhood Network has increased its partnerships by more than 100% within the last 9 months. Residents now have first-hand access to over 120 new employer connections through the GBNN website. Employers that are excited to enhance and extend their employment opportunities to our community.
Hi, my name is Dion. I'm in 3rd grade. I'm 8 years old. I like to attend in Bright Stars summer camp. The thing that I like about Bright Stars summer camp is going to field trips like Six Flags, Dave and Buster's. The thing that I like most is beating Pastor Harris in basketball.
I usually tell everybody that I beat him up right after he said that, but don't you all tell anybody. But the reality is, what does all of this have to do with our model and what we do? We are firm believers that, trauma presents itself in all kinds of ways. And especially now, just think about it, economic trauma, because now more than 24 million people, unfortunately, are now suffering from being unemployed. They're now filing for unemployment. And so it's really, really amazing. Everybody's talking about COVID. Who's thinking about the trauma post-COVID and what's going to be happening after that? And so this model is really, really important to us. And it comes from consistent engagement, community organizing, and clergy influence. These are the 3 perspectives that we use to make sure that people understand why we've been able to have the kind of impact we've been able to have. But let's talk about data. In 2015, we were able to survey 19 schools. In 2018, it was 21 schools. We were getting ready to survey 24 schools this year, but COVID messed all of that up. And whatever you're going to do for the community, you need to make sure you don't do it for them, don't do it to them, do it with them. So hearing their voice was really important. So we collected data from 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And that's been really, really exciting and impactful. How can we best address the trauma needs of the youth as well as the adults? Tell us how to serve you. This is pretty amazing because when you think about it, since the days of Tuskegee, you don't do research on Black people. And so we've been able to do this. And this was not a 10-question survey. This was a 127-question anonymous youth survey that we did in all of these schools. We went through the IRB and the RRB process and had tremendous success. First time, 72% response rate. Second time, 81% response rate. And look at what the young people said. I'll give you a moment to take a look at the screen. Of course, community engagement, connection, what happens when they leave the school? Where do they go? Who do they run to? Where are the churches? Where are the playgrounds? Where are the places that we can go? Peer relationships, thinking about peer influence, positive early childhood experiences, and then family support and engagement. But look at the last one. 35%, 2015. 50% in 2018 show clinical symptoms of depression. What that means is all of us on this phone, if all of us were to raise our hand, 1 out of every 2 have potential children that are suffering from depression. Now, this is pre-COVID. This was before COVID was an issue. Think about that trauma now. We also talked to the parents to get some words from them. They shared with us they're traumatized as well. Grandmama, granddaddy, all of the mothers and fathers traumatized as well. And so we use their perspective to build the model that we built. Internal programming, child and family services, behavioral health services, and then community outreach and programming. Now, here's where the flagship is. Since January of 2012, more than 5,300 people have been murdered in Chicago alone. That doesn't include those who have been shot or wounded. I took a trip to Israel in December of 2012 and saw a place called Natal. And I decided to bring what I saw there, those who are facing those or serving the needs of those who are suffering from PTSD. How do we bring this model from Israel to Bronzeville to serve Chicago? And so we've been able to do that. As a result of our partnership with Northwestern, University of Chicago, the United Way, Cigna, and the MacArthur Foundation, and so many others, we've been able to train 2 cohorts of faith and community leaders. Now, let me stop and pause for a moment. Black and brown people, as you all know, don't usually go to counseling for 4 reasons. Number 1, think about a lot of times they don't go to counseling because number 1, they don't trust the counselor. They don't think they can afford the counseling. Number 3, there's no relationship with the counseling. And the sad thing is, number 4, the stigma. Nobody wants to be labeled crazy. So if I don't know, trust, or think I can afford counseling, and then there's a stigma, somebody may call me crazy, who will I go to? Most of the time, black and brown people don't really go to counseling, but they still come to the church. They talk to the faith leader. So what the Lord told me to do when I was in Israel, identify, train, certify faith and community leaders to provide trauma counseling based on that Israeli model. And all of these folks that I mentioned before, these partners, they've given us millions of dollars to implement this model. And it's been really, really exciting. I went through it myself. We had to go through 5 weeks of intensive training. And I didn't realize I had not dealt with my own trauma. You're talking to right now who you think is Pastor Chris Harris. But the reality is my last name should be Simpson. But my father raped my mother because he was an alcoholic. And she got pregnant and she wanted to abort me. But amazingly, my predecessor, Dr. James Stovall, who was the founder of the church that I now pastor and I was born and raised in, he told my mom, don't abort him. God has a plan for his life. Who knew? 25 years later, I would take over his church. Now, I want to be clear. I started off with an afro, but this is what pastoring can do to you, right? End up bald head. But the reality is, I didn't know that I had not dealt with a lot of that childhood trauma. And so they took us through the training because we also learned that you can use the wrong scripture at the wrong time and add more trauma on top of trauma. And so we were grateful that we went through all of that training. And so now more than 24 faith and community leaders have been trained, and we're setting up our next virtual training, and we're excited about it. We have advocates who are on our helpline now. They were on the helpline Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but due to COVID and the spike in our calls, they're Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And unfortunately, folks are really afraid, having anxiety. They're calling late at night. So those are advocates on the helpline, and the ambassadors go throughout the community to make the community trauma informed. Because in our community, we don't even know what trauma is sometimes. We'll just say it is what it is. When it rains, it pours. And churches, faith leaders, we try to pray the pain away. But even Jesus himself was a trauma counselor. When the man was laying at the pool for 38 years, he asked him a question. Before he healed him, he heard him. He asked him, do you want to be made whole? And a lot of times you can't change a situation until you first sit down and have a conversation. So before we can heal, we must first listen. And so here's a bird's eye view into what's been happening, and then I'll be ready to take any questions as I get ready to close.
It has really been amazing to see the strides we've taken to achieve what it looks like to develop an ecosystem across a whole community. Led by BSCO in collaboration with over 75 community partners, we have developed a working community action plan that outlines a set of priorities and evidence-based strategies to be implemented with the goal of reducing violence and strengthening the overall community.
The Family Advocacy Center at Bright Star Community Outreach is a community-based initiative positioned in the greater Bronzeville area. Each year we service about 600 individuals and families. Some of the services we provide are not limited to parenting coaching, anger management, parent cafe, various forms of counseling, and our new initiative, which is the DCFS alumni through workforce development.
The MST program, the Trauma Helpline, our Trauma Ambassadors, and our Family Advocacy Center main objectives include being a symbol of hope for healing and attainment of positive emotional and mental health. Our strategies include providing trauma response intervention to support our students, parents, and teachers in the community who are routinely starting a day in distress.
We understand that hurting people hurt people. My job is simple. It's merely to come alongside individuals, human beings, hear their brokenness, and hold the line until hope is regained. I am grateful for this experience and for the 343 lives that we have been able to impact this year through the helpline.
I have the privilege to serve as one of Bright Star's trauma advocates. Along with my colleagues, we have engaged 35,793 individuals through our services over the past 2 years. As ambassadors, we don't just wait for trauma to come to us. We convene workshops with first responders, educators, faith leaders, funeral directors, and even ex-offenders, just to name a few. Having received so many tools through our foundational training from the trainers of Natal in Israel, in conjunction with the continued training from our immediate supervisors, we are equipped with the skill set to empathize with those experiencing trauma and providing them with coping mechanisms while being a listening ear.
Multi-systemic therapy is an intensive evidence-based family and community-based treatment program that works with at-risk youth ages 12 to 17 and their families. The school to prison pipeline describes the ways in which students are pushed out of the education system and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. MST helps to keep at-risk youth out of the juvenile justice system by implementing customized interventions within the home, school, and community.
I've been doing this work for more than 20 years, and the work that we are doing in partnership with Bright Star is by far the most gratifying work of my career. This is true for 3 reasons. Number 1, leadership. You can't sit in a room with Pastor Harris without being inspired by him and his vision for this work, this community, and this city. Number 2, people. Strong leadership inspires smart and committed people, those with the same values, hopes, dreams, and vision. And number 3, data. BSCO is committed to using data and research to drive this work. Pastor Harris and his team know that vision and having a good heart isn't enough. We have spent millions of dollars implementing programs and policies that simply do not work or do not have the impact that we think they do. You need all 3. BSCO is all in on all 3 of these, and we are all in with them.
With the support of so many friends and partners this past year, the MacArthur Foundation as one in particular, we've been able to push this plan forward in an amazing way. We took $1 million and we are sharing it with other organizations to implement new programming and increase capacity for other organizations throughout Greater Bronzeville.
At the Urban Resilience Network, BSCO is strengthening hope and saving lives. Please visit www.brightstarcommunityoutreach.com for more information.
So as I wrap this up, let me just say, people always ask me, Pastor, how did you get America and Israel to work together? How did you get Northwestern and the University of Chicago to work together? How did you get churches to work together and the community constituents to work together? I said, you want to know the greatest miracle? The greatest miracle is getting preachers to work together. And it's really unfortunate, but it's a reality. We preach about unity, but we unfortunately don't like to work with each other. But we have seen and created a model where that's not an issue, and I'm grateful. So again, please let people know about the helpline that is available to them. COVID is not the only trauma that's going on in our community. So we need to make sure that we constantly raise that. There are many people who are so-called sheltered in place, but where they're sheltered in place is not a shelter at all, and it's not safe. A lot of abuse and other things are going on, and we need to continue to educate our community. And as it relates to COVID, think about our seniors and so many others who feel vulnerable at this time. My encouragement, please share what we're doing. And there are all ways for you to support this work, get involved, get inspired. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to help you be informed. Glad to be a part of this session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Harris. I appreciate you so very much. Couple of things just as a recap. This was so wonderful. I appreciate you coming on. The importance of not just persons of faith and communities of faith, but unfortunately we had had such a hard time getting preachers involved, but now they have an opportunity to do so. So one of my questions for you very quickly is, how can people actually get involved directly with the training for trauma and grief support, the model that is happening there at Bright Star?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. First of all, if people are interested in joining our work, first of all, they can visit our website at brightstarcommunityoutreach.com. That's the first thing. We'll put that down. And then also they can feel free to email me, email and say that you're interested. The email address is email PCH assistant, as in Pastor Chris Harris, assistant at Bright Star Kojic, BRIGHTSTARCOGIC.com. And just let us know that you're interested. And when we get ready for this next phase, we'll be reaching out to people. There are interviews and things like that as a process, but we look forward to partnering with anybody that's interested.
Thank you so much, Pastor Harris. We so appreciate you and all the great work that is happening as you're also bringing so many persons of faith and community leaders together. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for including me.
Yes, absolutely. We were able to get our grief counselor on board, the Reverend Dr. Wanda Jenkins. We had her by phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that we can go ahead and, oh, where'd it go? I'm going to share my screen so that we can take a look at, we can see Wanda Jenkins' face in just a moment, as soon as I'm able to get myself together. Let's see. I believe in her. I believe in myself. Hold on. Share the screen. There she is. All right. Dr. Jenkins, can you hear us, and can you let us hear you? Let's see. Dr. Jenkins, are you there? It seems like we're still having some problems getting her available. So let's go ahead and move towards our other practitioner who is on the phone with us, the elder Dr. Itihari Ture, who joins us all the way from Atlanta. Itihari, if you can go ahead and bring us up to speed with what you're doing up there and offering to communities.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, I was about to say, could you stop sharing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again, Pastor Harris, for providing with us such a concrete response to the conversation today about communal grief, and what I'm going to add is communal grief and lament, and the idea that what we do on the physical realm certainly manifests in the spiritual realm. We believe that most of us, I think, try to live that out. That keeps us doing things like with what Dr. Crumpton has put together. So I'd like to share with you all what I consider a Sankofa moment. My commitment is to acknowledge that there's no human experience that's a new experience, that everything that we encounter has been encountered before. And so there are lessons, there are traditions, there are rituals that we can pull from that have been tested through time. And so if you would join me to take just a very quick journey on this idea of communal grief and communal lament. And I'm taking it from the direction that Dr. Crumpton gave me in terms of two questions that she asked. And I hope you all can see the screen.
We can.
But she asked me 2 questions, and she mentioned one earlier today when we came on about how then do we grieve when our communal rituals are no longer safe or even allowed, and if we have to create rituals, what is it that we can create that will facilitate a healthy state? And so I would ask us to consider, again, this notion of Sankofa, that we're going back and fetching from the experiences that others have lived in and lived through. And that we consider situating grieving and lamenting as a form of bearing witness. And I think if you think about it in terms of maybe your own experiences of lament or grief, that you were actually bearing witness. So whether it was you were telling the story of love and the journey of love for someone who has then transitioned, or whether you are telling the story of some experience that that person or persons had with others, we're actually bearing witness. And so for those of us who also follow the sacred tradition of the Holy Bible, we know that there's a whole book committed to the poetry of lament, that this state of human existence called grief and lament is a necessary state. But sometimes we don't know how to communicate it as a season. And that is what I think makes it difficult. And especially in the time that we're in now, where people are in and days, I don't know about you, are running together. Like I am literally forgetting what day it is, what time it is. My time frame is also shifting so that hours can pass and seem like minutes. And then there's other times when hours seems like days. So there's this whole time shifting that's going on. And for that reason, I use in particular this symbol that you see. It's an Adinkra symbol that represents this notion of time changing. And what impresses me most about this symbol, again, is that if we think of the material world or realm as one of those triangles, and the spiritual realm being the other triangle, there's a horizontal line that is visible, yet there are 2 outer circles that connect them. And so this notion of creating rituals around lament and grief really asks us to consider that there is just this very, very thin line between the seen and the unseen, and yet we're always and continually connected. And so to consider your period of lament or our period of grief on a continuum that is a state of our being human. And when I think about that, other kinds of experiences about our humanity come into mind. One important thing that we have learned from looking at African traditional rituals around grief and lament is that it takes this bearing witness into a communal response. So it's not just the one person in grieving or lament, it is the entire community, because we're all connected because of this cycle of life. And so the moment that we do that, the moment that we decide that our bearing witness, and we've actually had real-time examples that I'll show or share a little later, we then have immediately created a space for lament and a space for grieving. And that to me is the very first most important thing to do, because all too often people grieve and lament in isolation. They think that they're putting themselves out or on someone, so they tend to keep to themselves. But the moment that we recognize it as a cycle or rhythm of bearing witness, we afford them a space. So that's number one. In this intent of creating this space, now what do we say? What do we engage in? And I like to suggest, as you see in this slide, 3 components of what we could consider the moment we welcome grief and lament in. So the moment that you bear witness, that you begin to tell that story, you have created that space. What do you do with that space? Perhaps what will come to you in bearing witness is the idea of something that has been disrupted. And remember, I said we've had examples of this before. and I'm going to share one now that I may mention later, but it's a real-time example of the disruption of the grief and lament around the police shootings. Now, whether we realize it or not, but that when we were on Facebook or any form of social media, or maybe we were in our classroom, or maybe we were at our church and we began talking about Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, we were actually creating a space for lament. Some of you may have had that experience, and then you noticed that the moment you started talking, others joined you. Well, we know that what that did was afforded us, even though we may not have known a Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin or Sandra Bland, but we felt an immediate connection with them and the disruption to the rhythm of life. Some of us went far to make comments and to post about it. And so then we became part of the circle of support without ever knowing those persons directly. The other thing that we might find that in our conversations or the way that we handle that is that we are now contributing to a storytelling, a narrative that may in fact interrupt further disruptions. I think what Pastor Harris shared earlier was an example about how one can embrace trauma in a way that says, we know this is a disruption and we're going to be about minimizing the impact of that disruption. And so in that, whether it's a program that we just heard from Bright Star, whether it's on your own individual conversations, whether it's a type of Facebook, social media, Instagram that you put together, you are creating a collective, a communal response that also puts us into this responsibility of addressing the lament and the grief. I would like to share with you the outcome. Well, why are we doing that? Why are we bearing witness to this grief and lament? I kind of see how it might help the individual knowing that somebody else is aware of what they're going through or what they're in, but is that it? And I would like to propose to you that no, that's not it. Again, remember this symbol that says that whatever we're doing in the material world has an impact in the spiritual world, and whatever's going on in the spiritual world has an impact on us. And so that we look at this disruption and the work of interrupting the disruption as restoring balance. So no, everything's not going to be all right, but everything can be in relationship to something else. So I hope that makes sense. Grief and lament circles, whatever you decide to call them, are not about softening the grief or softening the lament, but it is saying that this lament, this grief is in relationship to something else. And what we're proposing here is that it is in relationship to how we restore balance. So it could be something tremendous and heartfelt as we would feel about abuse, but it can also be grief and lament about just being absent. Absence for some people creates grief or lament. I am reminded of, again, this is Sankofa, I am reminded of how we collectively would acknowledge when even a person wasn't showing up in their community. And that may be with the sounding of a drum or a bell. It may be just everyone being silent to recognize that so-and-so's just not here. They're with us, you know, in terms of life, but they're missing in place. So someone right now may be experiencing that. They're just missing. They may have talked to them on the phone. They may be used to seeing them on Sundays. And so their grief and lament is around that. And so sometimes it just means us creating a space to acknowledge the absence. We have had examples, again, in our own tradition, those of you who are Christians, of the role of poetry. We have given experiences where people write poetry around their lament, around their grief. as a way to say this is sacred. This is something that matters to all of us. We certainly create rituals, and I do have a ritual that I will not share in this setting, but I have and will make it available, that acknowledges the entire journey of grief. I'm sure our grief counselor, if we can figure out the technology, will communicate to us that grief is a journey, that there are stages. And so in that, the rituals that we create acknowledge all the stages that embody grief or lament. And so a ritual, a comprehensive ritual, spiritual ritual, which again you will have access to, talks about how we even get the strength to wail. You ever been in an experience with someone you know is very depressed or grieving? They can't make tears come. Maybe their embedded theologies or their upbringing, you know, men don't cry, whatever, is even preventing them from getting the strength to wail. And so a collective ritual embodies all of the stages of grieving. And it embodies and supports those who can hold this space throughout the entire process. I wanted to give us, again, remember this is about Sankofa, going back and fetching what would be useful for us today, that we as African people have actually had a number of experiences of lament and grief from great disruptions that we can tap into. I am reminded that during the period of physical enslavement, there were many songs that we created and that were also communicated across our retention of African ways that helped us deal with grief and lament. Those songs were important then and they're important now. One in particular comes to my mind is Hold On to God's Unchanging Hand. Life is filled with swift transition. And so that song becomes one of the songs that we sing and are still singing. Some of us may be familiar with the work of the Equal Justice Initiative that took the great disruption of lynching, the unmet and unfelt grieving of those who were lost to random acts of violence, and has created for us a space of sacred memory. And so sometimes in our collective grieving, it is important to mark what happened where. Again, if we take a moment, we will see that our people, our communities have been doing that. And now it's time for us to bring those familiar things that they may have been doing as an individual or family into a collective responsibility. I've already mentioned about the police killings and how many of us began to grieve and lament through the social media. And so that becomes a primary means for us right now with our Shelter In to create these circles. So yes, we can do that. And we should be doing that. And hopefully this will encourage you and inspire you to do that. And then finally, I would like to remind us in a way that those who have gone on before us, whether it was by the normal flow of life or there was a disruption, that if we do believe that we are spirits, having a human experience, and thus we return to the spirit because energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed, then we might also consider that those who have gone back and returned into the spiritual realm are here to help us in our grief and our lament, and that they have with them a very important asset that we may not have. And the asset that they have is that they can see farther than what we can. And so to call upon them, to acknowledge that they are present as the great cloud of witnesses, our ancestors, that they can see farther and that they can assist us even in our grief and in our lament. And so that's what I wanted to share, Stephanie, with everyone in terms of where we are in terms of a collective grief ritual. I do have an example of a full ritual that will be available, I understand, with the information. And please know that in the future, you're very welcome, and I look forward to having more opportunities to share with you.
Thank you so very much, E.T. I appreciate you being here. One of a few of the big takeaways to kind of think about or for me, that came up for me, was the importance of recognizing that this is not only an experience, but it's an experience that is creating sacred experience, which calls forth the importance of sacred memory work, right?
Yes.
And I think especially in this time when we're really struggling through how to connect, to recognize that we have new mediums that can help us facilitate old practice, right? We can't do what we used to be able to do. We can't touch hands in the ways that, and so there's a loss there, but that doesn't mean we have to throw the entire thing out. There's an option for us to use these new mediums to reinvigorate, recreate, and be present with those old practices. Thank you so much. We do have, I'm looking at her, I see her beautiful face, the Reverend Dr. Wanda Jenkins. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you on my end. So if you've got yourself muted, then you'll need to unmute yourself. She is here to talk us through some of the kind of hard science and understanding what exactly is grief itself. We've talked about models for handling and responding to it through the communal model of Pastor Harris. We've also heard about particularly lament and kind of how we need to reclaim sacred experiences from the past. But it's also really important for us to understand what is grief. What is the distinction between grief and depression and things like that? And for that, we have Reverend Dr. Wanda Jenkins. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Did you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. And I have your presentation.
Thank God.
I know, right? If you need it, I also have your presentation.
And thank you. I'll get the doctor next year when I graduate.
Okay. All right. We speak those things that be not as they are.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's good. That was prophetic, I'm sure. And I just want to thank the prior speaker, because actually that's what my stuff is going to be on, is lament, because in honesty, lament is grief. And it's what we feel, it's what we are, but it's our way of expressing our grief in a meaningful biblical way. And it's a gift that God has given us, that we don't have to hold back our grief. Now, you said someone had the slide.
I do.
Although I honestly have them myself. I just want to keep myself on track.
That's no problem. If you want to, I can. You're a co-host.
No, I'm good. No, I'm good. I have them right here anyway. I'm always like that. I guess I'm kind of anal or whatever. But anyway, let me just talk a little bit about, I want to start out talking about grief, and then we'll move to COVID grief. Because in my belief, grief is grief, loss is loss, and it all feels the same. But I want to start with the terminology of bereavement. Bereavement is loss. It is an ending, and it is a beginning. I often think of that because when something ends, something new begins. And that's one of the main things we have to understand, that in our culture has been changed today as a result of this COVID-19, this coronavirus. And it's been changed, and we're not going to go back to the old normal or the old way that we did things, because whenever change takes place, whether it's dramatic because of something wonderful or whether it's drastic because of something uncomfortable or bad, life has changed, and it can never, ever go back. It's irrevocable. That's the bottom line. And loss is irrevocable. It doesn't mean that that life won't be good anymore. And actually, you can move forward and make life even better, because we learn from the things that happen in our lives. So in the ending, often, I love what Maltman said. He said, in the ending is the beginning. And so we have an opportunity to do new things. So as bereavement relates to COVID-19, the issue today is that it's pervasive. It's not in just one place. It's not in just one community. It's in the entire world. And it affects every facet of our life. It affects people's jobs. It affects how people's physical bodies. It affects their ability to sleep. It affects, in other words, it affects them mentally, emotionally, socially, emotionally, and in every way possible. This loss is pervasive. And that's what makes it somewhat what we would call a trauma. It's not a traumatic death like a suicide or a homicide or a car accident, but it is trauma because it's cumulative and it's pervasive. And at this point, there doesn't seem to be an end. Now, we know that everything has an end, but the reality is that we can't see when that end is. So it includes the fact that our view is limited and we can't see the end. It's the absence of physical health. It's the absence of social relationships. It's the absence of the emotional presence, the social presence, and even as it is, the physical and spiritual presence of the people that we tend to lean on when we can't lean on the doctors, and that's our chaplains and our clergy and our spiritual leaders. And that's what makes this sort of traumatic. Now, grief itself is not loss. Grief is the natural reaction to any and all losses that take place in life, whether it's emotional, psychological, geographical, loss of a job, bankruptcy, all of that loss produces grief. You're going to feel it no matter what. It is pain. I like saying it like that bereavement is LOSS and grief is PAIN. We don't get away from it. We are never away from pain. Pain is always in our life in some way or another. It's just that if it's kind of part of our everyday life, we just don't think about it the way that we would. So grief is not an abnormal response. It's a natural reaction to pain. You get cut, you hurt, you bleed. You don't have a choice. So it is pain and is manifested in every way. It is also, in some of the contemporary thought today in bereavement, considered a personal pathway of expressing the outcomes of grief rather than a series of stages of steps. I'm sure that everybody on this call at some point knows about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and thinks of the stages of grief. Grief is an experience like that, not really. It's not like walking up steps. It's more like an escalator where the steps fade into the next step, and the next thing you know, you're either at the bottom or you're at the top. That's really what that's like. So everybody has a personal pathway, a way that they handle loss and a way that they handle pain. It's just like some people, if they get pain, they have got to have something. Other people weather the storm. They use yoga, or they use music, or they use aromatherapy to quiet themselves down rather than take pills. It's not right or wrong. It just is what it is. And so we each have a personal pathway. Some people grieve in a sensitive way, and some people grieve in an instrumental way. The instrumental way of grieving is kind of like what business, if you're one of those persons who, when bad things happen, you get going, you take care of all the business. You may not show emotion, but you're getting everything in place. That's more instrumental grieving. What we're used to thinking about is the way we was at one point assigned to females very sensitive and emotional grieving. But grief is what it is. I myself, just from a personal perspective, when someone in my family dies or I hit a crisis, I'm very instrumental. When my husband died a couple of years ago, I knew what I had to do. And so I had to take my grief, which is something I'm able to do, and put it on the shelf and take care of business first. And so what that does for me and for some people who are instrumental is it makes room to be able to be emotional later on, to share your feelings with others, and to be able to work through the grief process. What does grief also do for us is it reminds us that we had a connectional relationship with someone, and that physical connectional relationship has been broken. But one of the things I know as people work through their grief process is they start to realize that a connectional relationship with someone you love, it never really ends. It never really goes away. We find new ways and new avenues of dealing with these people. I can remember one time I was dancing in the living room with my daughter and my son when they were little, and I was much younger than I am now. And all of a sudden, I felt a presence that I hadn't felt in over 30 years. And the presence was my mother. And I heard her in my spirit say, "That's the way to do it, baby. You teach them and you lead them on how to dance." And I laughed to myself and I said, "Yep, that's what she would say." Because the memories and the lessons that she taught me live deep within my heart. They don't go anywhere. They stay there, they germinate, they grow, they teach me, they reach me. And then when I relocated from Philadelphia, where my husband was from when we came here, one of the first things that my children wanted to do on October the 11th as a church was to take flowers to the cemetery to a grandfather and a grandmother they had never physically met, but I had taught them about them, like we teach about Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln and all of that. So they felt connected and they wanted to put flowers on that grave. So they were connected because I had taught them their history about their ancestors and the people they love. So we never really lose the connection. It's just broken here on earth, but not broken forever. Mourning is not grief. Mourning is a natural response. Grief is the reaction. Bereavement is the loss. And now mourning is an intentional, natural response to the loss and pain, where we gather together with others publicly and on a regular basis to work through the social process of mourning that loss. It's the process of, I call it, of acceptance. Accepting that someone you love has died or whatever loss has taken place, and what was before will never be again. You're in a new normal, a new relationship with life and loving that person. And then you move from that acceptance to a period of adjustment, where you begin to adjust your life to the new normal that you're in. And as you make the adjustments, what others would call a new normal actually becomes normal. It becomes a way of life and a way of living. As you make that adjustment, eventually you begin to adapt. And what that means is that there are things in your environment that won't be in your environment anymore. There are things that you begin to release and to let go of. Early in the process, because I'm a female and I couldn't do much with my husband's clothes, I gave them to his brother. My son was too small, but his brothers were about the right size. So there were things I began to release along the way. And as time went on, I began to release other things. Like in this year now, there's some other things I've released because I'm ready to release it. And so those are the things that make a difference. And so that's why it's still part of the mourning process. That's why I put mourning as a process, and it's progressive. It's not something that happens overnight. It happens gradually, and you begin to realize things are different. Within the first 6 months after my husband's death, I took my ring off and I put it in the safe deposit box because it just didn't feel right to have it on all the time. Now I wear it because it was a gift. And it's my gift, and I can wear it if I want to. So I enjoy it from time to time, especially if I get dressed up. I just feel like I have to have a ring on my finger. Since it was a gift from Sam, I wear it, and I enjoy it. So now, moving on from that, let's just talk a little bit about the grief from the pandemic. It's as I said earlier, it's a time of multiple losses. It's school. I feel so bad for young people today who are graduating from various levels of school that they're not going to get to celebrate that. And so families and schools and communities are going to have to decide how we're going to help our young people to at least have a memorial, a celebration of life for those things that they're doing, the achievements they've made. That's really important. And so we have people whose income has been diminished, their freedom, and when I say freedom, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the liberty to be able to go where you want to go. I'm 72 years old, and so technically as an elder, I should be sitting at home. But because I choose to continue to work and I work in essential health care, I come to work every day. But I know that's a blessing to my life because that means that every day I get out to get some fresh air and then head back home. But I go to work and come home. My daughter makes sure that she does all the shopping. So it is grief over relationships. We have to learn how to have relationships with people, whether they're close or not. And having been a person who lived throughout the AME connection and in different places, I've managed to maintain my relationships regardless of what state or district I'm in because it's a choice. So it's not something new that I have to do now. I've been doing it all along. So COVID grief itself is the loss of health, normalcy, family mourning, that's the worst part. People are not able to gather the type of support you usually gather when someone dies. And You need to understand that any death that happens during this time is COVID related, because it doesn't matter whether you die of a heart attack, a stroke, or COVID, the funeral practices and mourning rituals are all the same. It creates isolation, a sense of abandonment, powerlessness, and personal control. You know, we like to think we're in control, but the best thing that we can do in this life is manage what's happening in our environment. Complicated grief could be likely. Let me just say this. The difference is this. The circumstances under which we are living are complicated and very complex. It does not have to lead to complicated grief, but in some cases it will. And you can identify this simply by knowing that if you become more consumed with the dead than the living, how someone died, and that's where your mindset is all the time, it's time to work it through. It's time to get support and help. Death often, in this case, many of these deaths are sudden and at the beginning unexpected. People can't visit their loved ones. They may not be able to see them. But one of the things we do here in hospice is we use FaceTime. And we do FaceTime so that we can help people to have that sense of that moment when it's happening. And these are some of the things our clergy are going to have to do. Think about ways in which you can do virtual to make sure that people do have those opportunities to be with their loved ones when they're dying. It's not physically, at least on the phone or on FaceTime or something like that. Physical distancing and the limit of funerals. But one of the things I've seen is that some ministers and funeral directors are coming together to give these families the best possible rituals that they can. And it may mean everybody, all the people drive to the cemetery and stay in their cars and watch as things go on. Or sit out and just coming out and seeing a group of people sitting in their cars is emotionally supportive. And that's some of what we can do. The nature of this disease is known and unknown. We know it's contagious. We know it's in the air through droplets, but we have to practice good hand washing and wearing of masks. The spiritual dimension for many people is that they have a sense of moral guilt and their anger at the whole, just everything, the universe and you name it, and something we really don't have a lot of control over. But this is what I do want to say to you. For every person, there are tasks that we need to perform when it comes to grief. We need to accept the fact that that person is gone and that they're not coming back. And many of the things we have are not coming back. We need to adjust to an environment where the person or the issues we have are no longer present. And then we need to find meaningful ways that are personal to you that will help you to work through that grief and to move forward in your life. I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be on this. You know, grief is my favorite topic. Helping people to heal after loss is important. And knowing that the one thing about bereavement and grief is that it's not a hopeless circumstance, it's not a hopeless disease, it's not a disease at all. It's a part of life, and we can work through it together.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Wanda. I do want to ask you two questions. One was directly related to something that you said, and another one was actually something I saw on one of the slides. Can you say a little bit more about exactly what complicated grief is as opposed to like compound grief? And the second question, or compound, complicated, just the different kinds of griefs, I think would be helpful for us to know what those are and what they look like. And then the other question is cosmic anger. Like I saw that and I thought, that's something I feel it. I should know more about that.
Well, let me start with that one. Cosmic anger. You know, it's just like you're just mad at everything and everybody. You know, one of the things that African Americans can be mad about, and Lori Lightfoot said it the other day, 39% of the people who live in Chicago are African Americans. 40% of them have the disease and 60% have died. That's something that you're not going to take that type of cosmic anger away, because people are saying, why? Why is this happening to us? We're the least in the city, then why do we have the greatest death? It's an answer that is probably quite complex, but that can actually hinder a person's ability to grieve because they get stuck in the politics of the dying rather than, and the cosmic reality of the dying, rather than dealing with the pain and sorrows that they have. Sometimes we get caught up in rallies and things like that when we need to be grieving our loss. Complicated grief basically happens because people abort. It's aborted grief. It's cut off. People cut it off. Like you say, oh, children will get over it. No, they don't. And so when somebody's trying to tell you how they feel, you say, it's not that bad. At least, disenfranchised grief leads to complicated grief. If you don't franchise what a person is feeling, if you don't allow them to ventilate and allow them to share their feelings in a meaningful, healthy way, and know that you have provided deep listening and that you are hearing them, then that grief is going to go awry. And so it becomes complicated because people are disenfranchising their grief, or people don't know how to grieve and they abort it, or they have prolonged grief, they're always sad, and it can go into depression. That's the reality. Depression, clinical depression has a root. You know, it's something going on in a person's body. Then there's depression. I'm just sad. But you know why you're sad. See, grief tells you why you're sad. You have a reason. You lost somebody. But when it's prolonged and when you can't seem to do anything about it, it's complicated. And I'll just give you this, a quick example. My mom was murdered in 1972 when we both graduated from the same nursing school. And for 7 years, I was so busy helping my dad to raise my younger siblings that my grief was on the shelf. When I finally was able to go to college at 26 years old, I went to a Christian college, and as a result, I was in an environment that was very healthy. And then I began to grieve my mother's loss 7 years later. But in the meantime, I gained a nice 200 pounds, eating my life, eating my grief away, and a lot of other things. And but once I began to work with this, with a Jewish rabbi, he said, has anybody ever told you as a psychologist that you have a reason to cry and you have a reason to hurt? And that's when I knew. I was walking across the campus for graduation, and I realized that I wasn't going to do teaching or anything like that except for to teach people how to live, but that I was going to do grief work at a time when people weren't even doing grief work. And I got into the field through a Jewish rabbi who was supposed to teach me. And that's how I learned that what happened to me was complex and led to complicated grief. And unfortunately, I'm still paying the price of getting these pounds off. But that's what complicated grief is. It's usually complicated circumstances that hinder a person from being able to grieve right, so they either abort, delay, or prolong their grief.
Okay, thank you. That's so insightful. We do have some questions coming in, and we're going to start fielding those. But between what you just offered as well as something that came up in the chat box, I do want to ask Pastor Harris a quick question. So one of the things that you said, Reverend Wanda, is that someone told you have a reason to cry, right? And that makes me think of, first of all, lots of us are trying to just hold it together so we don't want to start crying. So there's that. And then there's also social conditioning and constructs that say that certain people don't cry. In particular, if you're supposed to be the strong one in the family, and also if you're supposed to be a man in the family, if you are the man in the family. So, and so I want to take a look at that, Pastor Harris, in terms of helping men to cry, helping men to grieve. And also, I saw one of the questions in the chat was also around trauma and grief that's happening with our young people right now. And so I know that I saw quite a few young folk in the video for the work that's happening through Bright Star. So I would love for you to just kind of talk about how do we help men to get in touch with the need for crying, and in particular, how are some of the models that you are developing there at Bright Star reaching out to our young people who are dealing with trauma and grief at the same time, as we all are, but it's a little particular. It feels a little different when it comes to our young people.
Well, let me just start off by saying, unless Itahari, I think I said it right that time, right? And then Dr. Wanda, unless they're coming to help train my staff, I ain't answering no more questions. This has been phenomenal, and I think it could be tremendously impactful. And I also think pastors need this training. Lord have mercy, because the amazing things that I just heard today, and we see it but we don't know how to really identify what we're looking at. We can't describe it in words. And Dr. Jenkins just smashed it. It's amazing. So with men, the first thing that I'll say is creating a safe space, right? It can't be a huge crowd. It has to be a safe space. Even our training with the cohorts, we limit it to 12 people because you're trying to unwrap a bunch of stuff like an onion, right? That we have covered with ego, with pride, with credentials, with experiences, with all of those things. And you're asking them to be transparent. In order for that to happen, it has to be relationship. I was kind of laughing at some of the comments because I'm always amazed by the lack of patience that people have, even when it comes to youth, because the reason we showed the model and the videos, it didn't seem interesting clearly to some, but they don't realize, listen, trust moves at the speed of relationship, right? And relationship moves at the speed of trust. And we can't deal with their trauma. We can't deal with their issues. We can't deal with their circumstances in any way unless you meet their needs. That's the reason, from my perspective, that Jesus fed people, right? He met their natural needs. And then he was able to go a little bit deeper. And when it comes to younger people, it's the same exact way. Some of them won't talk to you, but they'll text to you about what's going on, right? They don't know how to have social conversations because this is what they do all day. They look at that phone, so they don't have to talk. So if their communication is through a phone and through text, then being able to have a conversation about trauma is just as challenging as being able to sit in an interview when in fact they never had to talk to anybody. And I think those safe spaces are vitally important. Getting a man to cry shouldn't be the goal, right? But when you talk about, with most people in trauma, and I'll land the plane right here, when you talk about, when you talk to people, here's what happens, and this has been my experience. They talk about what happened. They very seldom talk about how it made them feel. They go to the issue, the experience, but they don't talk about how it made them feel. And what I've experienced is every time you talk to them and say, okay, I hear you went through a divorce. That's what happened. But how did it make you feel? Immediately they choke up. They start crying. And most men don't want you to tap into their feelings. But hear this, as I shut up, they will share their feelings with whoever they trust. That's why a lot of times a spouse can't get their spouse to talk to them because there's no trust. And there's a lot of issues with that with men. So trust, a relationship moves at the speed of trust. That would be my response to that. Hopefully I answered it.
Yes, you did. Thank you. And it made me think a little bit more. Thank you. Very helpful for us to I appreciate. We're getting a lot of comments also in the chat about relationship moves at the speed of time, or time moves at the speed. It just takes a minute.
Can I also add one more thing?
Sure.
Cultural relevance is a big deal, right? And a lot of people don't realize if you don't look like them and you don't live like them, you can't relate to them. And so it's unfortunate that you have a lot of people who want to do what is right or do what is professional without relationship, and it ain't gonna work. Let me tell you, grandmama sitting on the front porch will absolutely get out of you what somebody else who went to school cannot, because of relationship. And people can say whatever they want to. You can have more degrees than a thermometer, but at the end of the day, if the relationship ain't there, I don't care what school you went to, doesn't matter what pedigree you have, it ain't gonna matter. Let me just tell you, I'm a living witness. I went to Olive Harvey College for one semester and Moody Bible Institute for one semester. The only degrees I have are the degrees on my thermometer, but everybody who worked for me got degrees. It's relationship. And guess what? At the end of the day, the reality is if you don't build trust, create a safe space, and make sure that they know you before they need you, it ain't gonna happen.
Know you before I need you. Excellent, excellent. I do want to swing around and ask a question, because you're talking about relationship and talking about how you have to go about a thing, right? And some of the barriers that prevent us from connecting and having relationships that give us enough safety to go where we need to go with our grief. And so I want to ask E.T. Hari if you can talk a little bit about the danger of resilience at this time, right? And I want to say that in a particular kind of way. I think I want to talk about, there's a notion of toxic resilience, right? Which really is about how something hits us and then we're like, I'm strong enough, I can keep it moving, and then we jump back into it, right? Yeah. Can you talk about a little bit about how the cultural expectations of strength that people, strength and productivity, because we're living in a capitalistic system that is more interested in your productivity rather than your humanity. And so then you're forced into a level of strength and resilience that really doesn't have what it needs to hold. Can you talk a little bit about how we kind of can navigate that, and some examples of what it looks like, in case, so we can get clear on what we're dealing with that?
So what you're speaking to speaks to socialization, how we've been socialized. And so just like Sister Jenkins was pointing out, these stages, these states of grief and lament and mourning, we've been socialized to consider them outside the realm of life. And so because we've placed it outside of the realm of life, we've now then created this false narrative around what it means to be strong, to be resilient, to hold back or hold in. And so I was very much inspired by her words, because it was concrete examples about how all of the stages that she mentioned are part of the rhythm of life. And so if you begin to re-socialize, and this is where, to me, spiritual houses are so important, because much of this we learn in the way texts are interpreted and then shared, to re-socialize this bending with the flow or moving with the flow, and mourning, lamenting, grieving is all part of the flow. Then it's not that I have to resist it, that I have to come up against it. Like, it's not a part of what it means to have more life and to have it more abundantly. In fact, I now begin to associate going through those stages as a part of abundant living. So we're talking about re-socializing how we've interpreted what life is. There are some traditions that have already, that have done that have always connected this cycle, as Sister Jenkins pointed out, as a part of life. So there's no need to resist it. There's no need to gather muster behaviors, words, temperament against it, because it's part. So you bend with it, you go with it. So that's first. And I think that there are ways concretely, Stephanie, that we do that in how we now begin to present the conversation in the virtual world. So if we could consider posting or Facebook time, or however we're doing it, where we are using that kind of language about this is in the flow of life, that it is part of the rhythm of life, and that it requires us to collectively embrace it, as opposed to simply reporting the event. So what we're doing now is reporting events. So-and-so just, died. So-and-so's in the hospital. So-and-so, oh, that's my granddaughter who just came in.
Okay. The flow of life.
The flow of life. Okay, I'm so sorry.
She looked like she appeared out of the ancestral background.
She did.
How perfect.
It is really the flow of life. And so if we did that on FaceTime, so some of us may be in that position even today, right? Where you've got news of someone who's now ill, and you're tempted to go ahead and post it. I'm just encouraging us to take Sister Jenkins' words. Okay, I will. Just 1 minute. And post it in a way in which it connects it to some of the tips she just gave us. And even the words that Dr. Harris just used about the speed of trust. Imagine if you posted that disruption, but you use that language. It conjures up into the persons who are reading it, who may be experiencing the same thing, a different kind of being in that, Stephanie, which then contradicts that notion that we got to be strong and hold on. We're going with the flow. And we're part of it. And we're acknowledging all the things that she said and using the language that's come up in this very symposium, to me, is the first step.
Wonderful. Reverend Jenkins, did you have anything to add to that? And or if not, I have a question.
Yeah, let me just say, because I really appreciate what everyone has to say. I just want to address Pastor Chris Harris and say, I live in the Chicago area, and I do a lot of training on bereavement and grief, and I especially seek to do that with clergy and religious leaders. So no excuses, you know. But I did want to say that.
I'm so happy. Thank you.
With men, I want to say something about men and grief.
Yes.
One of the things that I have been able to do in these past 30 years that I've been doing this work, because I was one of the first Blacks to even be in this field and have done a lot of different things. But I attempted to have a men's conference, and I don't say I attempted, I actually successfully had a men's conference. And there were 18 men who came, half were heterosexual and half were homosexual. I knew the makeup. I didn't tell people the makeup. I was interested to see how these men were going to grieve, and I invited a friend who worked at Loyola University in California to come and lead the group because he was a male bereavement counselor that we had become known to each other. And it was the worst week could have been in Philadelphia because it was an ice storm. But this is what I learned about men who are willing to grieve. They don't care what the weather is. They all showed up. My girlfriend and I, who is a social worker, we set up the room. We basically served as non-participant observers. And it was a powerful, powerful weekend. These men came every single day of that weekend at the headquarters in Philly. They participated. They did all the grief work they needed to do. So we should never assume that a man has to cry to express his grief. I want to agree with you on that. That's why I talked about instrumental grieving. Instrumental grieving isn't low-level grieving. It's just the way some people grieve. We don't call it masculine because some women grieve that way. But in an environment where they felt trust, where they felt that we were taking care of their needs, make sure they had plenty of food to eat and drink, and they felt connected to the facilitator, it made all the difference in the world. And I've done quite a few groups here with men. And what I tend to do is then join another man to work with me, and then I do all the other stuff just to make sure that it goes forward, because there is something about identification. It's not a rejection of me. I don't take that personally. But I found that I have a lot of male clients who feel very comfortable talking with me, because I'm not there as a female. I'm there as a professional counselor, and I'm there to provide them with what they need. Now, God says this. He says, the scripture says that God is the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our trials, so that when we have been comforted of God, we may comfort others with the same comfort whereby God has already comforted us. And I love what Job said to his friends, because they weren't deep listeners. He said, if I had been in your place, I would not have done to you what you've done to me. I would have been there for you. That's a paraphrase by Wanda. But the bottom line is that people need us to be able to stand with them, to companion them on the journey, and to walk with them. And I love your grandchild. That's exactly a good example of how children are treated. We get so busy, and they need our attention when we have lost, and they need their needs met. So that moment you took with your grandchild is what we have to do with our children. They don't need us for long. They just need a minute. And grief given to children is that's done minute by minute when they ask. That's pretty good.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wanda. I want to switch gears to get into one of the questions that's here in the chat. And in particular, actually, it was directed at you, Reverend Jenkins. It says, they have an additional question about complicated grief. Is it important to name the trauma, rage, oppressive systems that are related to grief as part of the collective lament? For example, what you were naming around the disparities associated with COVID deaths. Is it okay to name that as part of the morning ritual? Or are you saying that is what gets in the way of grief, right? I think she was talking about how when I think when you mentioned that sometimes we will latch on to it, latch on to the systemic things instead of dealing with the feelings. So I think she's asking, are you saying that is what gets in the way of grief, naming that as a compliment, or just trying, she says she's just trying to understand better on that point.
Oh, okay. Only if it becomes your mantra and not your method of working through it. My mom was murdered, okay? And people would say things like, oh, your mom passed away. No, she didn't pass away. She was murdered. Oh, your mom they would use other euphemisms because they couldn't stand the word murder. Well, I have an issue with the word murder. She was a nurse coming home from work. She was shot. She was robbed. She died. Now, yes, she died, but she wouldn't have died if she hadn't been murdered. And so that was important for me to name her death, to name what it was that took her life, because that was one issue, and then she died. That was the other issue. So the trauma was one issue, and then the loss was another. And so by doing that, I dealt with the murder, and then I moved on to the fact that what was the real issue? I missed my mother, and she was gone forever. And so I've been able to have groups of people who lost suicide, homicide, and any of the natural deaths together, because we want to name the trauma, name the loss, and then move to the most important thing in life. How am I going to get back to living again? And that's where we start to do the grief work. But you do have to name your trauma. You do have to say, this is a terrible thing. But it's not enough for you to just say it. Somebody has to validate it. And that's what we do. Yeah. We allow you to vent it, and then we validate the reality of loss. And that's what I'm saying, is that when someone comes to see me and they say, I'll give you a real good example. It's funny. It wasn't funny, but I was working in the morgue in Philadelphia, where I had started the program for working with families of murder victims, but I had to work with all people. And every time someone came in, I'd take a little sheet and write down different things. And one of my questions to them was, who do you know who killed your loved one? Most of the time people didn't, or if they did, they would say it. And the lady sitting in front of me and the mother, the lady looked at me and said, I killed him. I didn't know what to do. I said, Jesus, help me. And then the mother jumped in and said, my son was and I'm not going to say what she said. She said, but he beat her all the time. And after 26 years, she got fed up. So mom and daughter-in-law were there together. They had to claim his body and everything. And I realized that she needed to say, I killed him. But his mom needed to say, my son wasn't what he should have been, and he caused it. And all I did was listen. And then at the end, I said, in the future, when everything is said and done, you two need to go to family counseling, because you're going to need to work through this in many ways. Because one day, you're going to miss the baby that you have. And one day, you're going to miss the husband. Right now, this is what you need to take care of. So we need to hear the story. We need to validate the story. And then we need to offer people a future so that they can have a healthy life in the long run. And so some of the things we hear in our community can be pretty raw. But we just have to, I wasn't ready for a lot of what I heard, but I was privileged to be in that part of people's lives. And that's what we need to understand when we're doing grief work and hard work in these kind of circumstances, that we need to just be able to deep listen and be compassionate and offer people avenues of hope. That's what we need.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jenkins. This has been so full with Reverend Jenkins, Itihari Ture, Elder Itihari Ture, and Pastor Chris Harris. We are coming to the end of our time together. I do want to say just a couple of quick things. People have asked, will they have access to this video? Yes, the video will be posted on McCormick Theological Seminary's website, along with the resources that you've seen, or links to the resources from Bright Star. We'll have links to be able to get you everything that you've seen, as well as also, Itihari, you also mentioned that you have instructions on an actual grief ritual itself. That information will be posted as well. Before we go to a last word from our speakers, Reverend Dr. Barbara, my co-convener, is there something you'd like to offer before we give our presenters the last word?
Thank you so much. Just simply want to say a huge thank you and to recap briefly some words that I heard. Certainly these presenters have shared information that is practical and spiritually engaged. And we heard again today that all of this is for us first, our own personal growth and development. And then it's for us in our leadership, our calling, all of the wonderful work that we do in and with our communities. And also the video and links will be posted on the Presbytery of Chicago website as well. Thank you all so much, just phenomenal.
Thank you so much. Reverend Barbara is my co-convener and my ride to life buddy. Pastor Chris Harris, if you could go ahead, and then followed by E.T. Hari, and then also Wanda in that order.
Sure, thank you. My mom always taught me ladies first, but since you're the convener and I'm gonna do what you tell me. Let me just say, again, I'm so humbled and grateful that I was not only a participant, but I was a student in this session. And so thank you all for all that you have shared. It has empowered and enlightened me. And I may be sneaking in on some of your sessions you do in the future, because I think it's important that we all continue to be students and learners. And so thank you again. I put in the chat, we're looking now for this next phase of what we're getting ready to do for our clinical director. And so if you all in your sphere of influence or relationships, if you know of folks who may have the credentials and other things and experience and the heart compassion for what we are doing, I put that in the link, or it's on our website under careers. And then the last thing that I would say, never forget the power of what I call MOP, the ministry of presence. Because sometimes we're trying to do all the time. Sometimes it's good for us to just be. And so I want to encourage everybody to understand that just being present a lot of times for people is really, really important. So today, being present with all of you all today has truly blessed me. Keep up this great work. Stephanie, thanks for inviting me. And Barbara, thank you guys so much for including me. Keep up the great work, everybody.
Again, as with everyone else, thank you for inviting me to this symposium. I so appreciate all of the comments. And I think the only thing I would say, Stephanie, is kind of what I always believe, and that is everything we need is already in our community. And so as I look at what people have posted and the folks that you brought together, we have what we need. And so the provision has been made. I think it's just for us to access it and use it. And so I hope that we not only get to stay in contact, but the folks that are here in the session, that you also be in contact with us so we can continue, because everything we need is already here.
Thank you so much.
I am just excited to be able to share this information in this particular forum. It is such a blessing in my life. And so I am so grateful to Dr. Barbara and to you that you included me in this. You just don't know how much this is just an immense blessing in my life. I am, as I said earlier, I am 72. I'm finishing a coursework to do my final paper for a doctorate. It's the childhood dream at 5 years old. Never knew I would get it in the area I wanted to. And I just want to be as meaningfully profitable to God's body of Christ as I possibly can. And so all I have to say, I hope your job is open to anybody, Pastor Chris. So, but I would like you to I would like to say my phone number, because I don't think I put anything on there. It is 708-941-9656, and that's Serenity Grace Ministry. And anybody that would like to call and be a part of a online support group, I am there and very open to doing that, and also spiritual direction. So thank you so much once again. I don't like to do commercials, but I had to do that this time.
Please say that number again, please.
My phone number is 708-941-9656, and that's Serenity Grace Ministry. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
To the three of you all, thank you so very much. I appreciate you. To our listeners and viewers who have joined us, we appreciate you as well. We hope that you'll join us next week for the last of the April webinars. Next week's session will be on immunity and health, understanding what COVID is actually doing to the body itself from a medical standpoint, and also looking at nutrition, right? There are some things that we can do to kind of fortify our systems to make it through this for the long haul. So please join us next week. Again, next week will be the last of our April webinars. Starting in May, we will move to 2 webinars a month. We wanted to make sure we hit it hard to respond to what is happening as soon as possible for the month of April. But in May, we'll switch to a format where it will be only twice in the month, and you'll get updated information on how that's going. Enjoy your time that you create for yourself. And thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless you all.
God bless you.